The annual HOA meeting ended not with applause but with a gavel impaled in a bundt cake, a vote of no confidence, and a slow clap from the back row where I stood, holding a freshly notarized motion to dissolve the entire board. Karen Patterson, flanked by her signature lemon-colored clipboard and her cult-like board of yes men, looked like she had just been handed divorce papers from the universe. I grinned and said with satisfaction, "Motion carried, Karen. You are done." My name is Jack Morrison, and I never wanted to be involved in HOA politics. All I wanted was to restore my family's 100-year-old lake cabin in Pine Ridge Estates, a rustic gem surrounded by cedar groves and unspoken rules. I lived there with my wife, Sarah, and our 2 elderly golden retrievers. Enter Karen Patterson, president of the Pine Ridge HOA, a woman who believed hand-carved shingles were optically disruptive and once filed a complaint about someone using beige curtains 3 shades too warm. Karen hated our cabin from day one. She claimed it did not match the architectural integrity of the newer cul-de-sac homes. She sent warnings, fines, even a cease and desist for operating a historic facade without compliance. The letters started arriving weekly, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, our weathered wood siding was deemed too rustic. Then our stone chimney was apparently 4 inches too tall according to some obscure regulation she had dug up from 1998. The harassment escalated quickly. She would drive by our property multiple times a day, taking photos from different angles with her phone. Sarah caught her measuring our mailbox with a tape measure at 6 in the morning. When I confronted her about it, she claimed with indignation that our mailbox was 3/4 of an inch too close to the road and posed a public safety hazard. She even hired a surveyor to verify that our property line markers had not shifted since 1924, hoping to find some technicality to exploit. Then came the eviction attempt. She declared our home in violation of a clause written in 1998 that stated any structure older than 50 years must be subject to review and removal if deemed architecturally incompatible. That clause had never been used before. Until now. She smiled with triumph as she handed me the official notice at my front door, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her clipboard. But Karen had made a critical error. She had not properly notified all homeowners about the clause activation, which required a 75% vote according to the original charter. When I pointed this out at the next meeting, she dismissed it with a wave of her hand and said the board had emergency powers. She then produced a document supposedly signed by all board members granting her unilateral authority in matters of architectural compliance. 2 of those board members later told me they had never seen that document before. The intimidation tactics intensified after I challenged her. She filed a complaint with the city claiming our cabin was a fire hazard, which triggered an inspection that found nothing wrong. She contacted the health department about our composting bin, alleging it attracted rodents. The inspector who came out actually complimented us on our proper composting methods and asked for tips for his own garden. Each failed attempt only made Karen more desperate and erratic. Sarah was devastated when I showed her the paperwork. This cabin had been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather built it with his own hands after returning from World War I. Every beam, every stone in the fireplace had a story. Karen wanted to tear it all down because it did not fit her vision of suburban perfection. She scheduled a vote to declassify our cabin as a valid residence, framing it as a matter of community aesthetic renewal. The meeting was set for the following month, giving us barely any time to prepare a defense. She sent out glossy flyers to every homeowner, featuring unflattering photos of our cabin next to pristine McMansions. The caption read, "Preserving property values through progress." That is when I started digging into the HOA bylaws and financial records. What I found was shocking. The bylaws had not been updated in 15 years, and several board members were only board members because Karen had forged their nominations. I discovered this when I called David Sullivan, listed as the treasurer, who told me bewildered that he had never agreed to serve on any board. He thought someone had been playing a prank when he kept getting meeting invitations. The rabbit hole went deeper. I found out Karen had been collecting proxy votes from homeowners who had moved away years ago, using their abandoned votes to maintain her power. She had access to these because she insisted on being the sole keeper of the HOA's official records, storing them in her home instead of the community center. When previous board members had questioned this, she claimed it was for security purposes after a fabricated break-in at the community center that police had no record of. Her control extended to the HOA's communication systems, too. She had the password to the community email list and would delete any messages critical of her leadership before most residents could read them. I learned this from Ben Cooper, a software engineer who had noticed his emails disappearing and started tracking them with red receipts. He had documented 17 instances of censorship over 6 months. Even worse, Karen was funneling HOA dues into a community enhancement fund that mostly went towards ceramic squirrels and leadership retreats at bed and breakfast establishments in Vermont. The receipts were eye-opening. $3,000 for decorative garden gnomes. $5,000 for a weekend seminar on synergistic neighborhood dynamics that was actually just a spa weekend for Karen and her inner circle. I also discovered she had created fake vendors to bill the HOA. Garden Beautification Solutions LLC was registered to her maiden name. Pathway Perfection Incorporated had the same P.O. box as her personal business selling essential oils. She had even billed the HOA $800 monthly for website maintenance when our website had not been updated since 2019 and still featured photos of the previous board president who had moved away 3 years ago. I spent weeks gathering evidence, staying up late to comb through financial documents and cross-reference them with actual community improvements. The basketball court promised in 2021 never materialized. The playground equipment fund had been redirected to purchase designer planters for Karen Street exclusively. Meanwhile, residents were being fined for grass that was half an inch too tall. I rallied the silent majority of homeowners who were tired of Karen's reign of terror. Using the bylaws to my advantage, I forced a special election. I printed flyers exposing the financial irregularities and held backyard information sessions with apple cider and peach cobbler. People started sharing their own horror stories about Karen's arbitrary enforcement. The Johnsons had been fined for having the wrong shade of white trim. The Nguyen's received a violation for their vegetable garden being too productive and therefore commercial in appearance. The momentum built quickly. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other were suddenly united in their frustration. We created a private social media group that grew to over 200 members within days. People posted screenshots of ridiculous violation notices and shared strategies for fighting back. One resident, a retired lawyer named Margaret Foster, offered to review the HOA's charter pro bono. The stories that emerged were both hilarious and infuriating. Tom and Linda Brennan had been fined $500 for having their garbage cans visible from the street for 30 minutes after pickup. The Patel family received a citation because their daughter's chalk drawings on their own driveway were deemed graffiti. Even more absurd, Karen had tried to fine the Hendersons for excessive happiness after their son's birthday party featured too much laughter that supposedly violated the noise ordinance at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday. When the special election vote came, I walked into the community center with 20 proxy ballots from homeowners who could not attend, a notarized motion to audit the budget, and an attorney who specialized in HOA dissolution. The room was packed, standing room only. Karen sat at the head table, her lemon clipboard clutched like a shield, surrounded by her hand-picked board members who looked increasingly nervous. Karen tried to gavel me into silence when I stood to present my evidence. I pulled out my own gavel, purchased specifically for this moment, and counter-gavelled. The room erupted in nervous laughter. She screamed with rage, "I am the HOA," her face turning purple. Someone in the back row had started live streaming, and her meltdown went viral within hours. The video was titled, "HOA Karen Loses It Over Democracy," and racked up 500,000 views by morning. I presented the forged documents, the misappropriated funds, and the testimonials from homeowners who had been harassed for years. The ceramic squirrel inventory alone caused gasps throughout the room. $47,000 worth of lawn ornaments stored in a rental unit that cost another $200 monthly. Karen tried to justify it as strategic reserve beautification assets, but even her supporters looked skeptical. The vote was decisive. Karen was removed from the board with 92% voting against her. Her forged nominations were invalidated, leaving 3 empty board seats. In a twist she had not seen coming, I was elected interim president by a landslide. My first act was to pass a resolution declaring any structure over 75 years a protected historical dwelling. Our cabin was not only safe but now officially recognized as Pine Ridge's heritage site. The audit revealed even more financial misconduct. Karen's leadership retreats were exposed as vacations with her yoga instructor, Marcus Bloom, whom she had listed as an HOA morale advisor on the expense reports. She had spent over $60,000 of HOA funds on these retreats over 3 years. The district attorney's office launched an investigation into embezzlement charges. Her ceramic squirrel army was auctioned off to fund actual community improvements. We raised enough to finally build that basketball court and repair the walking trails that had been neglected for years. Every squirrel sold was one more reminder of Karen's wasteful spending. The local news picked up the story, running a segment called Squirrel Gate that featured interviews with homeowners who had been victimized by her arbitrary rules. During the investigation, prosecutors discovered Karen had also been using her position to run a side business. She would threaten homeowners with fines, then offer the services of her handyman company, Premium Property Solutions, to fix the violations. The handyman was her brother-in-law, and they split the profits. Several elderly residents had paid thousands of dollars for unnecessary modifications to their homes just to avoid continued harassment. Mrs. Eleanor Chong, an 80-year-old widow, had been charged $4,000 to repaint her shutters a board-approved shade of forest green when her original hunter green was perfectly fine. Karen was ultimately convicted of embezzlement and fraud. The judge, clearly unimpressed by her defense that she was protecting property values, sentenced her to 2 years in prison and ordered her to pay back $120,000 in restitution. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she turned to glare at me one last time, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to form words through her shock and rage.